Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being with us. Jason's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at Genesis Communications Network. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen lines are down across the board. They don't work, and we'll let you know when they do. Rich Scheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vince. I know I'm going to regret it, but how are you doing today? No, I didn't.
Well, since you mentioned cars, well, I did want to say something about cars. I'm glad you mentioned cars, Rich.
Imagine my shock.
Well, I was thinking about the number of vehicles that I hear with brakes that squeal, screech, and we're not paying attention. I'm not talking about you, and I'm not talking about me, but I'm talking about the young people. I think that when they hear clunks when they drive, they turn up the radio. When they hear the brake squeal, they turn up the radio. And it's not going to fix the problem. I can guarantee it will not fix the problem. So I just wanted to mention to our class, if you have a young person in your family and they're using an automobile, you might want to listen to when they decelerate. And if the brakes are squealing, that means either the pads are worn, that means the rotors are worn, that means there's a loose brake part rattling around in the brake drum and brake system assembly. Now, most cars have all-wheel disc brakes, but some still have rear drums because rear drum brakes are less expensive. By the way, drum brakes, when they're adjusted properly, will give you more miles per gallon than disc brakes will. And they're less expensive, but you have to adjust them, and that's the problem. So who wants to adjust brakes, right? It's too hard. So most cars have disc brake systems, and they have these metal tabs that are designed to be wear indicators. And they'll tell you when your brakes are worn to the point where you're just about ready to destroy your disc brake rotors, which are way more expensive than just replacing pads. Heck, you can replace pads yourself for $20, maybe $25 if you decide to get the more expensive ones. But there's a little tab, and when the pads get thin, you'll hear a high-pitched squeal. Normally when you're turning the steering wheel and braking, okay? But when it gets worn even more than that, it will squeal when you're inline stopping. That is the point where you need to look at your brakes right now. I mean, when you get home, look at them. And you probably are going to want to replace the brake pads. And you can do that yourself. There's plenty of videos to tell you how to do it. And then also, young people don't seem to be paying attention to the clunks when they're driving. They turn the steering wheel and there's a thunk or a clunk. And that's usually the tie rod ends are worn. The wheel bearings are not adjusted right or worn or broken. Or the wheel hub bearings are worn or damaged. The steering rack is worn or damaged. Or there's worn stabilizer bushings. And ball joints. So when your steering goes clunk, that's something you should look at. And you can look at it yourself. You can you can kind of crawl under some cars. Not some are too low, but if you can crawl under it, you can have somebody and make sure it's parked. It's not going to roll over you. If it's, you want to be on a flat surface. You want to have the emergency brake set and it in park. And you want to push down on the vehicle and see if you can find where that clunk is. And that'll tell you how serious it is. But the last thing you want to do is drive with a vehicle that clunks or squeals, because that's not good. That's not normal. That means it's about ready to fail. And if your tie rod end breaks, you're going to end up crashing into someone, crashing into something or losing control. That's the way it goes. And your brakes, if you can't stop, that's a terrible thing. Because you can crash into someone, lose control. So please pay attention to that. And that's all I really want to say about cars. But I only did that since you brought it up, Rich.
Yeah. Vince, you are funny. I think everybody knows when you talk about cars, your neck swells and everybody can see it. But, when you were talking about cars, you were talking about squeaky brakes. You know what I immediately thought of? That is a metaphor for the ignorance, apathy, and indifference phase that we are in as a nation right now. It's like you said, turning up the volume. A lot of people are unfortunately turning up the bread and circuses, and they aren't seeing the forest through the trees. And what I mean by that is the powers that be are doing everything to create precedents. Precedents to eliminate free speech, precedents to normalize pedophilia, precedents to increase electric costs and energy costs, precedents for everything. And I think we need to talk about that today. And as you know, Vince, I always have some articles that I have prepared for our broadcast. And I think what we need to, speaking of metaphors, I think what we need to think of right now, and hopefully President Trump and William Barr may hear this, and use something that they can remember as a metaphor. We should title it Mike Tyson. And I'm saying to President Trump and William Barr that I could defeat Mike Tyson in his prime in a boxing match at 21 years old, with me being almost 60. If I have the same strategy that Trump and Barr and the powers that be in the White House is using today. And what I mean by that is when you live in an emperor has no clothes society where people are afraid to speak up, and the people who are producing the lies, propaganda, false flags, and hoaxes are crying wolf every day, like the so-called left Democrat Party, which is not the Democrat Party anymore. They are the globalist elite, and they are funding all of it, all the propaganda, all the lies, all the false flags, all the hoaxes. And this is why we need to declassify all this stuff that we've been asking for. I mean, the whole system is fake and phony. It's overbuilt, the system. There's too many government workers. There's too much overspending. There's too much corruption. There's too much manipulation. I mean, government in general needs to be reduced by 95%. 90% of the people vote Democrat because they care about their own self-interest, high benefit package, and pension. 75,000 people are in the State Department alone. 38 million employees, federal employees, are either paid directly or indirectly by the federal government. And what the left is doing, they're literally selling political correctness and perception through management of polls and focus groups. Everything is phony. And going back to declassification, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. We need not just the FISA warrant documents declassified. We need Uranium One and the Clinton Foundation crimes to be declassified. Everything to do with Epstein and pedophilia. All the geoengineering and weather modification tools from the big corporations and the Rothschilds of the world. We need all documents related to Barack Obama and the billions of dollars of cash given to Iran. All the documents about 9/11 and everything related to hidden alternative energies that would benefit the people. Folks, if I don't care, I'm a Trump fan, don't get me wrong, but I also say it like it is. And we're at the point right now where if they don't do these things that need to be done, anybody can step in the ring, including a 60-year-old Rich, and beat the living bejesus out of Mike Tyson. Because if Mike Tyson doesn't fight back and I have 12 rounds to knock him on his ass, even a 60-year-old Rich who's lost 95% of the strength in my arms and hands, thanks to GlaxoSmithKline, will be able to do this. So I really feel that citizen review boards are absolutely necessary because I don't think these crooks are going to be arrested. I think that maybe a couple of mid-management people arrested and have their wrists slapped, but the big wigs, I think, are going to walk free. And I think it's up to us to start new precedents, to start citizen review boards, and start arresting the people at the very top of the big corporations and big government who are doing these crimes. They set precedents every day, like this Blasey Ford. You've heard me talk about the Kavanaugh effect. Well, now every man's a gang rapist. Basically, that's code for no adult mutual consensual sex. So the establishment is using women to eliminate due process. You see how they manufacture these precedents? And even though most of these women who attended this so-called fake hearing, most of them admitted to them lying. And what happens? And Kavanaugh will forever be known as a gang rapist at the highest court. So when you manufacture all these precedents, it's just like this whistleblower scam. It's all falling on its face. How can anything, you set a precedent and you change the rules a few days before the hearings, saying that it can be second, third, fourth hand information and hearsay? Who does that? Basically, you can pay anybody to be an actor. That's all that means. If you can't, I think we should talk about this, Vince, today. Like last week you mentioned Operation Nightingale and how the Catholic Church is taking databases, and the Vatican is taking databases from the Catholic Church to steal people's medical information. And I've talked about HIPAA being a fraud all along. It basically hides the inadequacies of the system. Everything, what they're doing is they're telegraphing what they're going to do next, and they're making precedents. Again, normalizing pedophilia. And here's a precedent. Vince, you mentioned, we talked privately a bit yesterday, and you want me to talk about one article in particular, and I've got a bunch here. Berkeley instructor, rural Americans are bad people who have made bad life decisions. Now, I want to dovetail two other articles with this. Consumers will be hardest hit in New York utility clash. Next article, Ukraine, Crimea, and politician children are getting on board of oil and gas companies, like the Hunter Bidens, like the Kerry's son, Pelosi's kids. You know, basically, it's pretty obvious that they are going to, and it could be for the Saudi Aramco deal, energy is going to go through the roof.
Energy costs are going up, yes. Hold that thought. We'll be right back with Rich Scheben. Amazing, absolutely amazing. The internet connection went down just after we went into the break. I called Jason and said, we'll need to connect via phone. He put me through on the phone. And just as the intro was ending, the internet came back. So that's what that little hiccup was, class. CenturyLink, the finest telephone network in the galaxy to avoid, if you can. CenturyLink. So I have to call them and get another $50 credit for what they just did. Absolute outrage. So I gave you the number a few weeks ago. So if you have that number, you give them a call and tell them what you think and how you want your $50 credit. If enough of us do it, maybe, just maybe they might fix the worst telecommunications system in the galaxy. Rich, we were talking about Operation Nightingale. We're talking about how the Catholic Church sold private medical records. Yeah, that's what they did. Talked about University of California, Berkeley professor saying that rural people are bad people. Now, I'm trying to think who would be rural. That would be Rich. That's you.
Yeah.
And me.
Yeah. Let me give a few more.
And Norm Shealy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gwyneth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, what they want to do is they want to cultivate followers, and they want to give as little options to people as possible. They want you to eat GMO foods. They want you to take vaccines that are dirty. They want you to eat red dye and meat. They want you to not eat organic. They want you to have fluoride in your water, which is a main ingredient in rat poison. China labels it as a pesticide, creates tooth decay, brain lesions, makes women sterile, makes the populace docile. They want you to eat steroids, hormones, and antibiotics in your meat. They love GMOs. They love pesticide-fed cattle. They love cloning livestock. They love the modification of proteins, enzymes in a lot of your foods, so your shelf life in the stores can be greater. They love lack of absorption of nutrients, metabolism, excretion, poor homeostasis in the body. They want your gut to be destroyed so you can't absorb the good stuff and you fight off the bad stuff. They want basically immune suppressants to take over your life and not immune stimulants. And they want you to know that vitamins and minerals don't come from the soil, which they do. So basically you can be fed anything that looks pretty that means nothing. So that being said, let me go back to this article. An instructor of the University of California, Berkeley, imagine my shock, said Americans who live in rural areas are bad people who deserve uncomfortable lives. Apparently his name, or her name, I guess it's his, but who knows these days, is Jackson Curtin. And according to his website, he's teaching multiple philosophy courses as a graduate student at UC Berkeley since 2013. Some of his quotes were, unironically embrace the bashing of rural Americans. They as a group are bad people who have made bad life decisions. Some, I assume, are good people, but this nostalgia for some imagined pastoral way of life is stupid, and we should shame people who aren't pro-city. And rural health care should be expensive for these people. It should be uncomfortable to live in rural America, and it should be uncomfortable to not move. Well, Jackson, here in rural America, there's a lot of hypocrisy what you're saying, because a lot of people can't even sell their properties in order to move in the first place, because 80% of this phony economy that Donald Trump inherited, people can't even afford to buy. And they're stuck in urban, suburban areas, so they have to live with just some of the things that I mentioned earlier. And this is basically what I was talking about. It's pretty obvious they want to increase the rate or increase the cost of not just health care, but also of energy at every level. And that's why I dovetailed those three articles together. And it's pretty obvious that when you put corrupt people in this system, they are going to throw out bits and pieces of the narrative and the agenda to make people be followers. And Vince, what do you think about what these articles I just mentioned?
Well, I'd love to comment, and let's do that when we come back. Rich Scheben with us, offgridmontana.com. And I've got a couple salvos to fire back at the University of California, Berkeley. Rich Scheben with us, and I was thinking about what you were saying about rural America. Well, I can tell you that an apartment might cost $1,000 a month in a city at an absolute minimum. But if you had 80 acres of land in rural America, your real estate taxes might be less than $100 a year. Okay, that's one thing. And if you've ever flown over a large city, well, like Phoenix, for example, Phoenix, Arizona, and you look down and you think, gosh, I wonder where all that solid waste goes when people, and you'll be flying over Phoenix for 15 minutes. Where does all that solid waste go? when people flush their toilets, 10 times a day? Where's it go? And if you think about it, you would need lots of square miles of treatment pools with chemicals added to treat all of that waste that is concentrated in Phoenix. But there's plenty of cities. Dallas, Houston, San Francisco, Chicago. It's all the same, right? How do they do that? And where does all that solid waste go? And what goes down the drain ends up in those sewage treatment pools. And then where does the water come from these cities? Well, it comes from rivers, it comes from lakes, it comes from man-made lakes. And in order to sell that, the municipalities have to add fluoride and chlorine, which are both toxic, deadly chemicals. Then you think about the electric supply. And if you live in a city or an apartment and you want to put in a solar system, how are you going to do that? If you want to be somewhat independent from a power failure, well, you can't. And right now, if you look at the grid, you'll find out that we are just at about maximum capacity. Now, how can we prove that right here, right now? Well, you know that in the past, you've heard the news reports in your locality saying, well, there's going to be brownouts because we can't deliver all the electricity that people want for their air conditioning systems because it's hot. Or we're having trouble delivering all the electricity people want because it's too cold. So for their heating systems. So you know that the grid is fragile. You know that. You know that it is just at about maximum capacity. You know that the delivery system is at just about maximum capacity. So then you hear, well, we need electric cars to drain the grid some more. All of these things really don't make sense. Now, what exactly do cities produce? Well, they used to house the machinery that made clothing. The garment workers were in New York City, for example. I'm just using New York City as an example. We used to make clothing. There used to be tool companies that would manufacture tools. New York City, Chicago, lots of cities had the manufacturing apparatus centralized, and the workers would live in the city and they would go to work in the city because that's where the machinery was to make the products that people would buy. So what do cities do now? Well, they're great places to collect rats and mice and disease and poop on the street and urine. Cities have become a place where many cities, too much of the cities have become a place where we don't make the machinery, we don't make the tools, we don't make the equipment, we don't sew the clothes, we don't weave the fabric, we don't innovate in the United States. So what does a city become? Well, a place where you can go and have someone schedule your appointment, or a place where you can go for fast food. But the fast food is not manufactured in cities. The fast food, the raw materials for the manufacturing of food products comes from rural America. So if the cities want to have a showdown, I'm telling you, rural America will win. Because can we do without electricity? Yeah, we can. It won't be any fun, but yes, we can. But can a city do without electricity? Absolutely not. It can't live without electricity. Now, will some of the rural residents die from not having access to hospitals in the city? Yeah, that's true. And medicine? Yep, that's true. But rural America will be way better off than urban America. And what do we do here at our farm? We raise food. For who? Anybody who wants to buy it. We raise the finest beef in the world, according to me. We really do, because our beef is not injected. It's not treated to puff up and grow faster than it normally would. And I would consider that naturally raised food the best in the world. But yet, we have people who think that the city life is great. And if you talk to our son, one of our sons, he'll say, you know why people go to the movies, Dad? Because they've got nothing to do. And that's the truth of the matter. People who live in the cities feel really stressed. They're breathing more particulates in the air than people who live in the rural settings. More pollution, more toxins, more disease. Of course, because the concentration of people is greater. Of course there's more disease. The cities are so bad, the city management can't even keep people from peeing and pooping on the streets. They can't keep people from throwing out cans and bottles and wrappers and bags out the windows of their cars. They can't do it. Cities are a mess. And that's why I don't live in a city. And if you get a chance, sit down at the kitchen table with your family and say, wherever you may live, anywhere in the United States. So if things get really bad, which road are we going to take out of town? Or which road are we going to take out of the city? Which would be our best bet? And then throw into that equation, how many people have vehicles that are half full of gasoline, half a tank? How many are three-quarters? How many are a quarter of a tank? How many are on empty? Because we'll get gas tomorrow. And how many of those people are going to jump out on the road in front of you with their vehicle and run out of fuel? And what happens if just one car runs out of fuel in front of you? Is that a problem? What if 7 run out of fuel in front of you? You're not going anywhere. So think about that. And why anybody would live in a city is beyond me. I can't figure it out. But then again, there's plenty of entertainment, right? You go to ball games. And then, or if you don't want to do that, you can go to ball games. Or you can go to ball games. Or you can go out to eat. What a great idea. Because people who live in the city probably don't have enough food to get through 2 days. And that's the fact of the matter. According to what I've learned over the years. Oh, we've got plenty to eat. You look in the refrigerator and the first thing that people say is, there's nothing to eat. Tell me I'm wrong.
So the average American has 9 meals. And let me throw a couple more statistics out at you. San Francisco's new DA, public urination will not be prosecuted. It's hard to believe that title of that article is not a Twilight Zone skit. And you think about now. First of all,
Rich, one second, Rich. I was just thinking. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Public urination will not be prosecuted.
Correct.
Okay. I remember when public indecency was prosecuted. Now, public urination is one step worse than public indecency. One is flashing. The other is flashing and depositing, right? It's worse.
Vince, you're using common sense and logic again in a world that has been bought and paid for. So, folks, remember, those of you who've been hearing me on the air for years should know that I'm born and raised in the metropolitan area of New York City. I made a cognitive choice to come to the Northern Rockies, to live off the grid, to live off the land, and to have certain lifestyles, adventures, challenges. It's not easy. It's definitely hard work, but it's a lot of fun. I'm building skill sets. I've probably given tours to thousands of people already. I really have opened up a lot of people's eyes to a new way of living. And I know a lot of people that have moved to rural America, not just Montana, but rural America in general, and they're waiting for the crapper to hit the fan. Now, I'm going to remind people, when you're living in urban, suburban America, your taxes and insurance to pay for government work or pensions and benefits are through the roof. Now, our economic system is just as fragile. People are saying, where is all the liquidity going that the Fed is pumping? Swiss National Bank now owns a record of $94 billion in U.S. stocks after Q3 buying spree. So basically, where the money's going is to bail out the too big to fails, bail out the too big to jails. I mean, Congress doesn't represent the people. It represents the lobbyists, the PACs, the special interests. They don't even associate with with us little people socially. They represent the funders. So One example is here in northwest Montana, we have the Libby Dam. Creates a lot of hydro energy. Okay, I don't know what percentage, but I'll bet you close to, I'll be conservative and gracious with this statement. I would say 90% of the energy goes south to California. So think about what's happening in urban, suburban America. Public University in Michigan bans Pledge of Allegiance because it's oppressive and discriminatory. I'm not making this up. These are all new articles in the last week. Even with better educations, there's another article. Millennials earn 20% less than baby boomers. It's because millennials have been socially and politically indoctrinated in schools. They aren't learning anything. Next article. Illinois school district rules that transgender students can have unrestricted access to any bathroom they want. Next article. Arby's apologizes for insensitive signs asking parents to control their children. If I did anything in a public restaurant when I was a kid, my dad would have beat the living bejesus out of me. See, you get rid of tough love, you get rid of discipline, you get rid of rules, and create a different set of rules, laws, and accountability based on what group you're in. This is the country you get. It's basically designed to collapse by the elite. Chick-fil-A, to stop donations to charities criticized by LGBTQ activists, and they're going to focus on homelessness and education. Well, I have a little professional begging to do to Chick-fil-A if you're going to not stand your ground and your standards. I talk about self-sufficiency preparedness groups all the time, or schools all the time, Chick-fil-A. We should call this the Berkeley Alternative. Basically, it's living off-grid, alternative energy, how to buy land, what land to look for, raising animals, hunting and fishing, canning, preserving food, handgun defense, our Constitution, Bill of Rights, teaching financial counseling, and our economy. Public schools don't even teach people how to check their balance their checkbooks. Wild and edible plants, nutrition, homeschooling ideas, gardening, farming. Chick-fil-A, that's what you should be doing. Let's educate in education and practice what you preach. We'll be back after the break, folks.
I was thinking about Jeffrey Epstein Stein and the two guards who were supposed to be monitoring him have been arrested. How does this happen? How does he get murdered in prison, in a federal prison in New York, when he should have been on suicide watch? There should have been a camera. There should have been footage of everything that happened. He should have been on camera recorded 24/7, every millisecond. But yet, I think the information that he had that would have come out in court was so damaging that he was murdered. There's no question in my mind that he was murdered. And at the same time, the news is covering Caitlyn, Bruce Jenner, the guy who wanted to become a woman. Well, they've got him in a bikini. And he's part of a reality show, and 24 hours into it, he started crying. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing meltdowns. So we took a former athlete. He decided to triathlon. Top of the heap, right? He takes hormones. He wants to have breasts, and now he's got them. And he wants to be a girl, but he can't be a girl because he really is a guy. And he's all twisted and confused, and he melts down, and he can't do his reality show. It's just tough. And what we're seeing, class, is young people in their 30s melting down because they can't cope. I got to tell you, a tough situation for trying to cope would be the first Great Depression. That'd be a tough situation. No food, no prospect of a job, no heat, having to walk the railroad tracks to pick up little lumps of coal that fell off the cars and get them in a bucket and walk miles and miles to get a small bucket. So you might have some heat for one night. Or being in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, out our way, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Missouri, and having the dust so thick that you can't see 10 feet, literally, that you wouldn't be able to walk out your door and go 10 feet without getting lost. And having silicosis, all this dust going into your lungs and choking you and all of your farm animals. And living in a house that there's no way you can keep the dust out of. And every morning, you'd have to sweep buckets and buckets and buckets of dust off the floor of your house every day. Talking about coping. And so we have these millennials that can't cope. They have no idea what it's like. They have no idea what it's like to live on a farm and deal with life and death all the time. All the time. Rich, have you had any animals die? Of course.
Well, of course I have, yeah. But Vince, let me comment on what you just mentioned. First of all, when you brought up Jeffrey Epstein a moment ago, they're obviously setting the precedent. So they're trying to, again, protect and normalize pedophilia and even put gray areas in the word legal. For example, article here, Watergate prosecutor fumbles in debate with Breitbart's Joel Pollack. What impeachment does not center on is legal illegal. They're trying to basically put gray areas and saying it doesn't have to be illegal to be impeached. And talking specifically about Jeffrey Epstein, NBC reporter arrested for asking 9-year-old for sexual photos. Happens to be a friend of Adam Schiff's. Next article, royal family biographer defends Prince Andrew from please listen to this carefully, folks. Soliciting sex from minors is not pedophilia. This biographer, she said, soliciting sex from minors is not pedophilia. We've talked about this on USAPrepares.com a million times, how the powers that be are changing definitions, changing words. Basically, this is why you have to go to an old Webster's dictionary or any credible dictionary that's older than 2009, because the technocracy is literally controlling the agenda and the narrative. Here's another article. This came out, I believe, in the last 24 hours. New York jailbreak. Law to free suspects accused of manslaughter and child sex crimes. They are trying to set the precedent for normalizing pedophilia. Vincent.
Normalizing pedophilia. Kind of like being an altar boy in the Catholic Church and being approached. Kind of like being a Boy Scout and being approached. Normalizing pedophilia. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And that's why I come out so strong against homosexuality. Because it's wrong. It's never going to be right. I'm never going to relent. I'm never going to say, well, it's okay because it's done in the privacy of their own homes. It's sick. It's sick. And our son was in a hotel, and 2 homos were going at it in the room above him. And even the hotel didn't want to stop it, but he made him stop it. If I heard the top of the hour news properly, Chick-fil-A is going to continue supporting LGBT types. Is that what I heard, Rich Scheben?
Well, I think it was more of an admission to basically stopping donations to charities like Christian charities that might have been against the LGBTQ lifestyle. So yeah. I don't know if it was as direct as what you just said, but I think they're just going to redirect their charities to education. That's why I brought up why they should help us create self-sufficiency, preparedness schools, which would not just bring people more rural, but to give them options, build skill sets, build synergy, teach them how to grow food, all the 19th century skills that we've lost, and basically have created our youth to be in so much despair because they don't have the skill sets. They don't have the options. And when you don't have options, you don't have opportunities because they've been so socially and politically indoctrinated to being followers and not thinkers that I think if Chick-fil-A did this with our help, we could really make a big difference. Vince?
Okay, so I'm trying to read through the news quickly, and I'm trying to figure out, is Chick-fil-A supporting LGBT, or are they anti-LGBT?
Well, they are and have been LGBTQRS, LMNOP, I don't know what the hell it is, but they haven't been supporting them, but what they have admitted to do is to stop the donations to charities like Christian groups that may have criticized LGBTQ activists. And you know what? That's one of the reasons, and I don't want to open up this can of worms because we've talked about it. These people, when all this propaganda came out, when they started going public, the first words out of their mouth is, to the American people, we should not legislate morality. That's an admission to what they do is immoral. Okay, that being said, I think and I'm thinking partially of the vote, I'm thinking partially of adult mutual consensual sex. I don't get it. I'll tell you right now, just like when you said when your son was in that motel room, I do not understand how two men can feel that way, but then you got to look at all these pedophiles who have abused these children and how messed up in the head they get when they become adults, and all the estrogen mimickers in our plastics that hold our food. Soy is 90% estrogen. You know, there's so much estrogen mimickers in our drugs, in our food, in our water. I would personally like to get to the bottom line and find these corporations and these big, deep pockets people that are poisoning our people. I think that's more important because, again, they admit it's an amoral issue. However, going back to the point at hand, I think Chick-fil-A just cannot. They were bombarded, despite their profits, with all this, offense from the people who feel that these activities should be normalized. And I want to spend 1,000 times more energy into the pedophilia ring because I think a lot of these people, I remember Gwyneth last week or a week before even said that, Vince. She had a couple of friends who were raped as young kids. I can't remember if they were boys or girls. And one out of two, they were sisters or twins or something. I'm paraphrasing her, and I can't remember the whole thing. But she said one turned out to go into the LGBTQ arena. And I think there's a lot of little kids that get abused, and they get messed up. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think pedophilia is adult mutual consensual sex. I don't think anybody does. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so big in the alternative news. You know, like I mentioned 3 articles today. The royal family biographer is defending Prince Andrew because she said soliciting sex from minors is not pedophilia. They're changing definitions, okay? An NBC reporter arrested for asking 9-year-old for sexual photos. I mean, it's gotten out of hand. How come, I want to ask you this, Vince, with all the threats, the treason, the sedition, the espionage, bought and paid for from the left, how come there's so much talk from A.G. Barr? How come there was supposedly a ton of pedophilia on and evidence on Anthony Weiner's computer? Where are the police from the New York City Police Department? For those of you who've been listening to me for years, you know I stick up for the police. And I know there's some bad exceptions. But why? Is it worth holding on to your job and your pension just for your own personal gain? To let your own country go down the tubes? Why isn't anybody speaking up in the New York City Police Department?
Years ago, Mrs. Finelli and I would go to these government offices where you have to go. Okay, if you want to pay your taxes, if you want to renew your tags or your license plates, if you want to renew your driver's permit, if you want their permission to do something, you have to go to these offices. If you want to have a Get Prepared Expo, they will tell you what you will do to use their facility. So, for example, I was told, I went to Springfield, Missouri, to lease the Ozark Empire Fairgrounds. It's a very large facility. It's a combination of city, county, government-owned property. They run it together. And the city is in the business of selling you licenses to sell your products there, to be an exhibitor and take revenue from the public. And they want a fee for that. And so at that point, I realized that I can no longer look at the little people who demand at the counter where you pay. I can no longer look at them differently from the people who make the rules that make you pay. So what I'm saying is, Mrs. Finelli would say, yeah, but, she that's her job. She has to extract money from our wallets. That's her job. She wants to keep her job. And after a short time, I said, no, I don't look at her any differently, the gal behind the counter. And it's usually gals behind the counter, because I think they're more successful at getting money from you rather than some guy who you might be confrontational with, because they're trying to steal money from you. So I look at them all the same. I look at the people from the little people at the bottom of the government food chain the same way I look at the people at the top of the government food chain. They all are in the same club trying to steal money from us every way they can. And just because it's their job, they are part of the conspiracy to steal money from us. So what I'm saying is, I don't look at the little people and say, gee, it's too bad that they've got to be so mean and rotten and try to steal money from us. I look at them as all part of the same cartel. And I'm not happy with any of them. I'm really not. I don't want to go to a government office. I don't want to have to renew my driver's license. I don't want to have to pay real estate taxes, personal property taxes, fees. Oh, I don't want to do all this stuff because it's theft. Because if they said to me, hey, if we take the gun and don't point it at your skull, would you contribute to our fund? I'd say absolutely not. Get out of here. But because they have a gun pointed to my skull, I think that it's a little better for me if I comply for now. But I'm not crazy about complying. So I read the rules very, very carefully. I interpret them to the best of my ability, and I pay those parasites as little as possible. Every step of the way. As little as possible. If there is a way that I can legally avoid paying taxes, kind of the way corporations like Federal Express does, I'll do it. And I'll defend it. And I'll read them their rules when we go into a challenge. When they say, Mr. Finelli, why did you take this deduction? I'll read them their rules. Because I've written notes as to why I've done what I've done. I'm ready for them. All the time. Because I read their rules. And I don't want to pay them anymore. I mean, really, does anyone listening go into a store like the Chinese factory outlet and it's $10, the thing that you're looking at buying, and you go, you know what? I'll give them 20. Would you do that? Of course not. So why doesn't everybody read the rules? Why don't you read the rules? Learn how to do it. Do your own taxes. Learn. It's simple. Publication 17. You can download it. Look at business use of the home. Look at business deductions. You'll be impressed at how much money you can save. But how many people do it? Hardly anybody. Why? I guess it's too hard. I guess it's like farming. I guess it's too hard. It's why don't people move out of the city? I guess it's too hard. I'm looking out the studio window right now. It's a red tractor. It's an International Harvester, 1989 model. It's got a 1,000-pound bale of hay on the back of it. Our son's out in the cold. He's all bundled up, and he's unrolling that bale of hay for the cows, and they're all following him. That's what he's doing. He's not sitting behind a keyboard, clicking numbers, digits, commas, decimal points, and letters, and special characters, making appointments for people. He's not clicking a mouse. He's out there working. He's actually making something. He's making food for everybody. That's what we do. And so maybe when you look at government employees, and I'm not talking about the guy who's got the road grader. I'm not talking about the guy who's mowing the median. I'm not talking on the highways. I'm not talking about the guy who's actually building something. I'm talking about the people who just click the mice. What actually have they done for you today except steal from you? What? I'd like to know. Rich?
Well, it's just like when you were talking about the Depression a few moments ago. I've talked to a lot of old Montana families who went through the Depression. They didn't even know there was one because they had gardens, they raised animals, they hunted, they fished, they lived with frugality. The only thing that they took notes on, and when I mean notes, I mean borrowing money and paying interest, is their home and their land. That is it. So we're not using the same business model, the same template, if you will. And we need to go back to common sense and the flow chart that made America great.
Rich Scheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. And you can go there and you can see the images of what life is like on the small farm. And, Rich, for statistics purposes, so how many people are there who are farmers? Class, get ready for this. You're not going to believe the number. Between 1% and 2%. Literally, between 1% and 2% of Americans are farmers. The rest of Americans, 98 or 99% of them, depend on us. Absolutely, positively depend on us, because without us, they're dead. There are more people right now locked up in prisons in the United States than there are farmers. Anything wrong with that number? Think about that. Why? Because farming is really hard. I mean, really hard. And it never stops. You can't say, well, 8 o'clock, I'm going to work on the farm. 10 o'clock is my coffee break. Noon, I'm going to get ready for lunch. 1 o'clock, I'm going to come home from lunch. 2 o'clock, I'm going on break again. And 5 o'clock, I'm done. Done. No more to do. Nothing on the list. No homework. I'm done. It's not like that on the farm. It's 24 hours a day. I got an invitation to travel. I've gotten many of them. Rich, you invited me to come out there to Montana.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I can't leave. I can't leave.
I spoke to your son, Vince,
a big day.
A few months ago, and he said he's got a plan 2 weeks in advance to leave, because I invited him out here as well. He says he has to plan 2 weeks in advance just for a weekend off. And this is another reason why we need these self-sufficiency preparedness schools, because farmers are going bankrupt. There's more delinquencies. There's more bailouts occurring, especially for the big corporate farmer. And we need what America needs, Vince. We need to talk about ideas and solutions. And what we need an executive order from President Trump, just like a line item veto. We need line item ideas and solutions. We need to vote and debate on specific ideas and solutions, and not vote for individuals who gets bought and paid for or blackmailed by censorship and surveillance. We need to give America back to the people, like Trump is always saying, and he hasn't done yet. The republic is bought and paid for. We need public forums, we need citizen review boards, and we need ideas and solutions where people can speak freely and give ideas and solutions to the little people, the bottom 93%. And if we had self-sufficiency preparedness schools, not only would our GDP go up, and Vince, I want a few moments after this next break to talk a little economic 101 regarding inflation and GDP and stuff like that too, if you don't mind. We need to go back to reality. Everything is fake. Everything's phony. All the numbers are corrupt and manipulated. We're not going to give the little people a chance to even survive if we continue at this pace. And we have to think outside the box. A self-sufficiency preparedness school in America would do so much good to create vocations, to create survival, to create jobs, to create businesses, because pushing buttons and managing paper and being politically correct is not going to do it, Vince.
Okay, I'm with you. You've mentioned for years now that we should do a preparedness school, and I thought, okay, so what we'll do is we'll pick up 200 acres. We'll take 100 of it and make it for a common area for all those who buy 1 or 2 acres. People would own 1 or 2 acres. I talked about it for weeks on the air. We would have, alternative energy. We'd have our own solar array. We'd have our own water system. We would have a meeting building. We'd have an agricultural building. We'd have an agricultural shop. We would have a greenhouse. We'd have a mechanics shed. And I offered that for weeks at about maybe $1,000 an acre, right? You can buy one. Put your own container on there and cut out some windows, and there you go. One person expressed interest. One. Hey. Well, when we come back, I just want to mention something about the 2-tiered system, and then I'd love to hear the rest of your Economic 101. Rich Scheben's with us in class during the break. I called a toll-free number, and I'm going to give you that number right now. It's for CenturyLink's loyalty department, 866-270-7498. I called that number because the internet went down during the broadcast. And so I talked to this gal. You go right through. You don't have to go through any of those prompts. And I said, so my internet went down. Here's when it went down. Here's the time it went down. And I'm calling for my $50 credit. She said, I'm sorry. Our system's down. We're updating our system. I can't help you. CenturyLink. So if you have a bona fide beef with them, that's the number to call. Took years, about 15 years to figure this out. And I'm giving you the secret number, 866-270-7498. That's the CenturyLink loyalty department telephone number. One other thing I want, and don't abuse it, please. Do not abuse it. And don't tie it up, because I got to call them back. All right, so Representative Stone, okay, Scott D. Stone, North Carolina, House of Representatives. He wants to know why the North Carolina Division of Motor Vehicles has a secret office set up for special people. Now, you're not one of those special people, and neither am I, and neither is Rich. So what happens is you stand in line for hours and hours and hours to go to the DMV for your license or your registration or your title transfer, whatever it is. But if you're a special person, higher up in the North Carolina government corporation departments, you can learn of this secret facility and you can get your transaction done in 20 minutes. A separate set of rules for y'all, bottom 93%, me too, and Rich, and them. And it's just one more tiny piece, tiny speck of government corporation abuse using your hard-earned money, tax dollars, to create a separate office for the people who tell you what to do. And Scott Stone wants to know why. And he's in the government. Now, I've heard that we've got one in Missouri. I've heard that there are other states. California has them. And these are for the special people who tell you what to do. It's an outrage. Rich Scheben's been talking about this for a very long time, probably since day one. And he's absolutely right. And you can look it up. secret DMV offices. Heck, you know that you get a free haircut if you're a senator, right? You know that. That's nothing. That's nothing. Well, I mean, those guys are busy, right? They have to look their best. You know, Prince Andrew has got to look his best. They all have to look their best. And you get to pay for it. So I just want to share that. Rich Scheben, back to you. I'm just going to pot down the microphone and sit back and listen.
I'll try to be as quick as possible, Vince. I know we're running out of time, but I've talked about special rules, laws, and accountability for different people, different groups so many times. I'm blue in the face. And you mentioned DMV. They even use the DMV database in Kentucky to steal names to basically change votes. I mean, the whole system is so corrupt. The DOJ, CIA, FBI, we've talked about this so many times. The whole system has no credibility left. The American system is illegitimate, where you get a job based on what group you're in. You know, it's just like, for example, in the first quarter of 2017, when the Swiss National Bank bought over $80 billion of stock, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, ExxonMobil, Amazon, Facebook, AT&T, GE, Procter & Gamble, Pfizer, Merck, Coke, Pepsi, Visa, Comcast. Basically, when the central banks try to corner the whole toxic system, the system that's illegitimate, and they own everything, they get to make the rules. And that's why nothing is making sense anymore. That's why we have no rule of law anymore. You know, when they talk about, I talked about GDP, I talked about inflation, unemployment, how all these numbers are illegitimate, okay? They're changing the calculations. They're changing the units of measure. You know, GDP doesn't show inequality. It's kind of analogous to the few gazillionaires controlling the mainstream media. It has nothing to do with accuracy or what's correct. They just control the narrative. That's all there is. So GDP, you can have, let's say you have a town of 100 people, just for simplicity purposes, and 98% are living paycheck to paycheck. They're broke. They're renters. And 2 people have all the money, they have all the property, and they rent to the little people. You can make GDP shine just because of 2 wealthy people in that town. That's what's happening today. The whole system is whacked out, and that's why they base consumption on GDP and growth on 70% of U.S. consumption, of consumers buying. It's totally illegitimate. Now, let me just go over this Treasury, IOU, central bank, corrupt, manipulated system. The U.S. government spends, creates debt, it goes to the Federal Reserve and then prints money out of thin air and then exchanges them for U.S. Treasury bonds. The U.S. government pays interest on all these Treasury bonds. Well, the amount of debt created by this transaction is greater than the amount of money created. For example, you've heard me say this a million times, it takes $4 of new debt to create $1 of so-called GDP growth. And it's been that way for probably at least 4 years, and it's rotated between $3 and $6. So the economy can't grow fast enough to pay off the debt, especially in a central bank debt-based system. So the whole system is collapsing right now. And basically the little people are losing everything. So there's the world, and this is a world situation. This isn't just a U.S. situation. The world is issuing new debt to pay for present debt. That's exactly what we're going. But when you look at all the units of measure, freight, shipping, PMI, I mean, there's just so much, and PMI and PPI, Producer Price Index, which measures inflation at wholesale levels. I mean, every unit of measure, every definition. Look at valuations right now. Look at the overbought situation. Everything is saying, ouch. Everything is saying the system is about to be broken. You know, we have liquidity and solvency relationships for everything becoming more volatile. We have more debt, less savings. Lagarde, who's now the new head of the EU, said that when we talked about this last week, you're better to have a job than savings. Basically, that's selling the narrative for future behavior for the little people to accept to go broke. And it's just like inflation. Vince, I want you to chime in on this. China and Japan are dumping U.S. Treasuries, our two biggest debt holders. Warren Buffett's sitting on $128 billion of cash. But don't worry, if he invests it, just like what's happened before, us little taxpayer people will bail him out, which has happened already. So when you talk about inflation as a unit of measure of a healthy economy, how do you do that? Here in Montana, inflation's absolutely way different than somebody in New York City, where I used to live. It depends on what your needs are, what your wants are, what your lifestyle is, how much debt you have, how much cash flow you have, your health. This is why I often talk about 4 things, and you can put many subsets underneath here, that's so important for a good life, and that's and they're all waning for the little people, and that's freedom, liberty, time, and health. And they're all waning dramatically and waning faster in time because the little people no longer has protection, rights, or restitution under the law. They use our taxpayer dollars for propaganda to create wedges and foment hate between people based on shade of skin pigmentation, based on your gender or the gender you identify as, or based on your sexual orientation, or based on your generation or your religion. Their whole job is to manufacture perception and sway public opinion. If we do not read up, folks, and I often talked about how important it is to read about Marx, the Communist Manifesto, the Frankfurt School, Alinsky, Cloward, and Piven. They have literally manufactured the little people to be drunk on the Kool-Aid of political correctness. And if we don't think for ourselves, everything will have absolutely loss of individual rights, whether it be through austerity, group identity politics, and political correctness. It doesn't matter. Pretty soon, you will not have the ability to think for yourself because you'll be called a controversial racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent hater, conspiracy theorist with an anti in front of every word and an ismist and phobia on the back of every word. That's how they're breaking people down. That's what happened with Chick-fil-A. They got broken down. They quit. They threw in the towel. So I'm asking the owners of Chick-fil-A, if you really want to do something good, let's get people together and create self-sufficiency preparedness schools. It doesn't have to be called that. It doesn't have to be a school. If we could have funding for this, we could change America and turn followers into thinkers and save a lot of lives along the way. Because as I've mentioned many, many times, we have literally given welfare to the rich, welfare to the government workers, welfare and liquidity to the banks. All the people who've been protected by printing money out of thin air has been the too big to fails and the too big to jails, the super wealthy. Fractional reserve lending, banks lending more money than they have. Stock buybacks. I've talked about this for so long. That's the only reason the stock market is up, or one of the big reasons, is because the big corporations are, instead of putting money into expansion, new products or services, research and development, and people and infrastructure, they're putting more money into new debt. So the elite, the CEOs, can cash in their stock buybacks and make money through artificial means of increasing the price, boosting earnings per share, creating new debt, creating more acquisitions and mergers, which usually means consolidation. So they buy back their shares, they give dividends to the wealthy shareholders, which are the wealthiest 8-9% of the public, and they stick executive cash into the pockets directly of the people. And when all this breaks and all this comes crashing down, all this high-yield junk bonds are going to go into default. We can see, I talk about default and delinquencies and bankruptcies going through the roof as often as I can. So, Vince, when you hear about things like inflation, I want you to comment on that because whether it be where you live in Missouri, it could be, you look at Kansas City, you look at St. Louis, you look at where you live. Don't you agree that if you do certain things a certain way, you can cheat the inflation unit of measure a little bit? I want you to comment on that after we return from the break.
Okay. Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. Okay, Rich asked me about inflation. So inflation class is the insidious theft of your monies, we'll use the term monies, value. It's hidden theft. It's money stolen from you through the erosion of purchasing power. Let me give you a couple examples. So in 1964 and before, a dime was 90% silver and it was worth 10 cents. That same dime today, just the metal value, no numismatic value, no special rarity, just the metal in a 1964 and earlier dime puts the value at $1.24. If you have a 1965 and newer dime, because the silver was removed, that dime is worth 1.5 cents in its metal value. So just rough numbers, just very, very rough numbers. A 1964 dime is worth about 150 times. I'm sorry, 100 times, almost 100 times more than a 1965 or newer dime. In the 1960s, you could take a dime that was 90% silver, and you could buy an ice cream, like an ice cream sandwich, ice cream cone. You could buy a Coke out of a machine. You could buy and still have money left over if you bought the house brand of soda at a can of soda, 12-ounce soda at the supermarket. They were 7 cents. A loaf of bread was 12 cents. I know this for a fact because I was there. You could get a men's haircut or a boy's haircut for 25 cents and a men's haircut for 35 cents. These are the real numbers. You could buy a gallon of gasoline for 24.9 cents a gallon. I did in my lifetime in the 1960s. So inflation is your purchasing power gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's because the government is in the business of creating more currency. It's an insidious theft. So the longer you hold on to money in your bank account, the less it's worth. And in our neck of the woods here in Missouri, people are absolutely positively broke. That's because we don't push buttons. We actually work for a living. The people who push buttons seem to make a lot of money. And if you look at the businesses that are really doing well, they're in the entertainment business. They're in the it feels good business. They're not in the...
Okay, Vince, I'm not sure if I lost you. I think we only have a couple minutes left. But I'm going to basically pick up where you left off. Sounds like your internet broke down again. Okay, so I'm going to just finish it up here, folks. Basically, when we shuffle money around and create creative accounting, if you will, for non-productive, non-earning purposes, and put it to things towards breads and circuses and basically distractions, dumbing down and dividing the American people, it means nothing is real. We lower the bars of standards for printing. We get jobs through group identity politics. This disincentivizes the working value and the whole process along the way.
Hey, I'm back.
All right. Well, I just picked up where you were kind of leaving off a little bit.
Well, I wasn't leaving off. I wasn't leaving off. I got disconnected.
Yes, I know you did. And the engineer popped in and told me, and I kind of just mentioned a few things. We only have a few seconds left. But basically, folks, we're seeing increased bankruptcies, defaults, and delinquencies. So economic cycles deal and wealth and inequality and debt are going to increase. And this is basically deflationary. So we have inflation issues, especially in urban, suburban America. Just look at your taxes, your insurance, your your maintenance in the cities. And look at where the food comes from in the country, okay, in rural America. I'm just saying if we picked up some of those lost 19th century skills and dovetailed them with 21st century technology, your deflationary, inflationary ratio could benefit you, okay? Because when lending, we have less lending, which we are, because people, like I mentioned with Warren Buffett holding on to $128 billion of cash, this creates a decrease in money supply. Even though they're printing left and right with the repo rates up to hundreds of billions of dollars a day, which we've talked about in detail. But it's affecting different areas because the money is going to the too rich, the too big to fail, the too big to jail. They're going to the banks to keep them liquid and solvent. So just think about when we get to the point where we have a decrease in money supply. And when loans are repaid and they're not recreated, this deflates bubbles, creating cheap, non-legitimate money. So if you're in an urban area, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to get ugly. And I hear the music coming. So, folks, thank you for listening. Vince, I'll give you the last word on your own show. It's always a pleasure, Vince. Thanks for letting me exercise my First Amendment rights.
Oh, thank you, Rich Scheben. It's always delightful broadcasting with you, class. I got to tell you, it's getting tough. Once you get over the target, they disconnect you. We'll see you tomorrow.